Welcome to the Africa Caribbean Reasoning series hosted by the PJ Patterson Institute for Africa Caribbean Advocacy at the University of the West Indies. I am your host, Sharon Bogswolf, and I invite you to join us every month for this reasoning led by our distinguished scholars. UWITv will rebroadcast our program at different times, and I invite you to check the UWITv schedule in your area so you can engage during this very interesting series. Let me share a short history of the Institute, which was launched in 2020 on the Mona campus. It's led by the Statesman-In-Residence, the Most Honorable PJ Patterson, former Prime Minister of Jamaica. The Institute is mandated to initiate and build mutually beneficial relationships between Africa, the Caribbean, and the African diaspora. Its activities will focus on the challenges that we, as people of African descent, face, but also seek solutions while working together. In other words, we will tell our own stories and chart our own destiny. Prime Minister Patterson also serves as the patron of the university's Giving Program. He's the recipient of the Chancellor's Medal and the Order of the Caribbean Community. He's also a recipient of the Order of Oliver Tambo from South Africa and the Order of the Volta, Ghana. There is so much more to say, and I have with me the Statesman-In-Residence, the Most Honorable PJ Patterson, who will share with us why this institute is so critical to us as children of the diaspora and how the institute has begun to engage with our brothers and sisters in Africa and throughout the Caribbean. We're happy to have you with us, PM Patterson.
Thank you.
Now, tell us a little bit about the Africa Caribbean Institute for Advocacy and why is that beneficial to us as a nation?
In December 2019, at the instigation of the Vice Chancellor, Sir Hilary Beckles, the University of the West Indies approved the establishment of the PJ Patterson Center for Africa Caribbean Advocacy. It is part of the global outreach of this university and specifically to enable us to cooperate with other academic institutions on the continent of Africa. The university saw this institute as being essential to complement its several departments that relate to Africa, Caribbean history, and academic studies. I said we were created as a center. In fact, we got approval subsequently to be an institute because although we are located on the Mona campus, our remit is across all 5 campuses through the regional headquarters. Why did the university conceive this as necessary? In addition to our common ethnicity and our shared experience of slavery and also of colonialism, the university recognized the need also to be looking forward. It happened that when this came into being, there was the global pandemic. And if ever there was any argument about the necessity and importance of it, that was amply demonstrated by what happened during the COVID pandemic. You will recall that for a very long time, the countries of Africa and the Caribbean were denied access to the treatment to deal with this global disease. And eventually, when they spared some of their excessive collection of pharmaceuticals to Africa, we in the Caribbean got a share of that. And there are two things from that experience alone. The first one is that we have to develop our own knowledge, our own expertise. And the second one is we have to stick together, particularly in dealing with the global problems which confront the world today. I mentioned slavery and colonialism. It should be necessary to elaborate on the plight which we have suffered from those two experiences. It's sufficient to say that we certainly are entitled to redress for reparative justice. And it also means that we as newly independent countries have to recognize that the global governance was not designed for the likes of us. In fact, it was done by the victorious powers after World War II, when we were still colonies. And it therefore has to be one of our main objectives in being a voice for a reform of the global architecture. And between the 54 countries of Africa and the 14 countries of the Caribbean, we constitute just over a third of the membership of the United Nations. If we stick together, our voice will be compelling. And that has to extend to the financial institutions such as the IMF and the World Bank, also in international organizations, the World Health Organization, the World Trade Organization, and even in UNESCO, where we are seeking to promote the links which exist and develop our cultural heritage for the benefit of our own people. And so we have embarked on a program of work that entails working on policy support for all the initiatives that are being undertaken by governments and public institutions in Africa and the Caribbean.
There's no doubt that we are certainly related in more ways than one. And we know that there is that very strong relationship and bond between both Africa and the Caribbean. You mentioned earlier the issue of reparative justice. Tell me, how does the Institute play? What role does the Institute play in promoting reparative justice?
As we know, CARICOM heads made a demand of 10 points for reparative justice. The lead responsibility for that is vested in a committee chaired by the Prime Minister of Barbados. and Sir Hilary Beckles is the head of the commission that supports those efforts. We are presently at a point where the academic scholarship has been done. It's compelling. It is beginning to get some resonance in other parts of the world. Universities, both in North America and the United Kingdom, have recognized the need for redress, and a number of countries in Europe, particularly the Netherlands, has made some step towards an apology, which is a minimum requirement. It's now at that point where we've got to convert the scholarship into meaningful action. In other words, advocacy is essential. And that has to be moving on all fronts. Judicially, that's the subject of consideration by legal scholars and practitioners. In the United Nations, where we have recently seen the issue of a report by the Secretary General on the failure of the international community to address issues which arise from the Durban Declaration. So the advocacy has to proceed at the governmental level through diplomacy. It has to be done, very importantly, with like-minded organizations, especially in Europe. And we have to build up a wall of demand which compels the governments who benefited from slavery to offer appropriate redress. So the Institute for Advocacy works alongside the Center for Reparations Research in a very active and cooperative fashion.
You know, PM Patterson, as we hear what you're talking about, we also feel very strongly that advocacy must therefore translate into action. And we believe that the Institute, in partnership with the Center for Reparations Research, will keep that, that issue in the forefront, because we don't want people to forget about it.
And we're prepared to work with all other organizations and individuals who are prepared to support the CARICOM plan.
You mentioned rather earlier the issue of research. And you could share with us a little bit of the type of research that you're thinking about that will be led by the Institute and the impact that we're hoping to achieve.
In 2021, there was the first summit of leaders of the Caribbean and African nations. And together, they formulated a very detailed, elaborate, and comprehensive plan of action. For that to be implemented, policy studies will be necessary. They will cover such areas as climate change and global warming. They will deal with issues pertaining to health, to education, particularly in a time of technological revolution. We also need to look at the opportunities of trade between us. At the present time, trade between Africa and the Caribbean, when accumulated, only accounts for 3% of the global trade. Of course, to effect trade, we have the challenge of the transportation system. Marcus Garvey envisaged that many years ago with the concept of the Black Star Liner. In this age of aviation, we have to see what are the possibilities. We may have to start with charters in the first instance, and we also will have to look at the whole question of movements of cargo. It's a bit of a chicken and egg situation. Which one comes first? But our role is to assist in the policy studies being undertaken and anchored by the CARICOM Secretariat and the Secretariat in the African Union. And to do that, we have a range of distinguished scholars, technical experts, and friends of the Institute who we can call on to assist us in undertaking the policy studies as may be required by the secretariats.
PM, this sounds like really excited work. Hard work, but excited work. So far, the Institute was launched in 2020, and we are now in 2024, and we recognize the years of the pandemic. What are some of the events that the Institute has participated in, and are you pleased with the impact and the outcomes?
Well, first of all, to some extent, we were limited by the restrictions of the pandemic. But also, the pandemic forced us to recognize that we can use technology to achieve virtually what was not possible before. We have participated in various seminars and symposia, some organized by the University of the West Indies itself, others by institutions in the diaspora in which we have attended. We have been at the forefront of making sure that the Day for African Unity is celebrated in appropriate style. We have engaged in academic exchanges on topics, participated in dialogues organized by various groups whose works and interest are part of what falls within our ambit. We are now looking forward in this year to have a series of podcasts and, of course, some symposia. One will be held in March. We'll be tackling two broad areas. The first session will be dealing with climate change and global warming and its threats and its impact to the countries of Africa and the Caribbean. And the second portion of that will be dealing with information and technological innovation. We have already identified cultural heritage as the next area for our concentration.
You know, and that is very important to us as a people, wherever we are, our cultural, our how we developed, what we built as peoples all over the world. That is important. And I know that you're one of those that talk about, yes, we need policy and papers, but there's nothing like people to people exchanges as we go through this journey.
And even more importantly, for young people, that's essential because it's obvious that we need to know about ourselves, what we have achieved, what have been the impediments to our progress, the extent to which, by deliberate effort, the colonial powers have subjugated us to thinking and speaking in a certain way. And the resistance which we have given through our philosophers, through our painters, through our music, to all of that. There was a time when drumming was banned for political meetings because the colonial powers thought that drumming was a way of sending subversive messages. That's no longer the case. And as Marcus Garvey said, and Bob Marley sang, we need to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery. We have to be engaged in freeing our minds because no one else can do it but we for ourselves.
Thank you so much, Pierre. But I'm going to ask you to just divert a little bit. You had mentioned earlier the issue of distinguished scholars and fellows. Could you share with us how that program came about, why it is so important to the Institute to have that cadre of intellectuals and creatives on board?
Well, first of all, we have to operate in a situation where we receive no financial support from the university. So we have to use our ingenuity to secure the resources that are necessary. And essentially, there are financial resources which have to be provided, but most importantly, the human resources. And for the work that has to be done, we have to be able to find people with the knowledge who are prepared to be engaged and contribute of their expertise voluntarily without expectation of material reward, but with the certainty of personal fulfillment. And so we have available to us scholars of renown, some of whom have retired from professorial duties and probably have now some more freedom with the use of their time. Others who are still actively engaged and have full access to the store of information which is necessary to undertake those tasks. We also have a group of experts, and they cover trade, finance. We have authors as part of our group, persons who have written about the Black experience, who are helping us to find our footing as a people, and who have helped to establish that those points of connectivity between Africa, the Caribbean, and the diaspora. We put very great emphasis on the diaspora, remembering that it is the same ships that took our ancestors across from Europe. Some ended in the Caribbean, some were transferred to North America and South America as well. To be candid, we have been dealing more directly so far with those in North America, but we have a new research fellow who has come on board, Professor Ramsey, who specializes in Hispanic studies, and we intend to expand the breadth of our activities, firstly beginning with the Caribbean littoral, Colombia, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and eventually Brazil.
I'm going to repeat again. These are in both interesting and exciting times for the Institute, yes, for the University of the West Indies, and when we think of the outcomes of what it is that the Advocacy Institute here is doing. The Distinguished Fellows Program is I have not heard of anything as broad as this program before. And I just want to share quickly with our listeners and viewers, rather, that the program, our listeners and viewers, will be hearing from some of the distinguished scholars during this program.
They certainly will. As you indicated in your opening statement, we now will be doing these broadcasts on a monthly basis. The Vice Chancellor has directed the university TV to enable us to explain, to carry the message, because we want an understanding by our Caribbean people and our African brothers and sisters what we all are about. And it's very, very important to get not only the academic community involved, but civic leaders as well. And in that regard, I would emphasize the role of our churches and our non-governmental organizations and Pan-African groups in general. We will work with whatever organization is committed to any portion of our terms of reference.
You mentioned earlier about young people, and I know you're passionate about involving them in the process, what it is that is happening at the Institute. I think I heard about some student groups. You want to expand on that a little for
Yes.
us?
It's still in the embryonic stage. For one, we want to make sure that the Guild of Students on each campus understands, accepts, and support what we are about. It was many, many decades ago, but I remember being an officer of the Guild, and I know any attempt to impose an idea or a structure on them without their consent is going to get a pushback. So we are in the course of moving from the Mona campus, where I think one group has already been established, to having other groups on other campuses. And we have the clear understanding that though we are a UWI institution, we are not precluded. In fact, we are encouraged to work with tertiary institutions that are external to the University of the West Indies. And we have already identified those with which we will move during this year.
And we're looking forward to that. Again, I say exciting and interesting times. Before we leave, is there anything that you would like to add that you want to share with our viewers that we did not touch on initially?
No, simply I would like to say that as we go forward, unity of purpose and of action is an imperative. We live, I would say, in a hostile environment where unfortunately race has become increasingly a trigger point, and not in a positive fashion. So we must be proud of who we are, and we must work with all those who are committed to spreading a message that no matter our color, no matter our race, no matter our religious creed or political belief, we belong essentially to one race, and that's the human race. And we only have one planet on which we all must live in peace, in dignity. And the Institute will be working assiduously to contribute to that end.
Thank you so much, PM Patterson, for your insight as we face the challenges as people of Africa and of African descent. It is clear that the Institute will continue to bring people and ideas together. The region will be exposed to the perspectives of our scholars as to how best we can bring our ethnic and familial ties to benefit us all. This program was produced by the Institute for Africa Caribbean Advocacy at the University of the West Indies. Thank you for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you soon.